दिल्ली का दफ्तर तो
हाय बिनू हाय नहीं भाई अपना जो
AIPSO 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 യുദ്ധമൊഴിഞ്ഞൊരു ലോകത്തിനായി സ്വപ്നം കാണും പ്രസ്ഥാനം AIPSO AIPSO വെടിയൊച്ചകളെ വിട പറയൂ ഇനി വെളിച്ചമെത്തുകയാ പടയോട്ടങ്ങൾ ഒഴിഞ്ഞൊരു ലോകം ഇവിടെ ഉദിക്കുകയാ ചരിത്ര വഴികളെ നോക്കൂ അവിടെ പരക്ക രക്തക്കറയല്ലേ പിടിച്ചടക്കാൻ നിങ്ങൾ ഒഴുക്കിയ ചോരച്ചാലുകളല്ലേ ഇനി വേണ്ടി ഇവിടെ കുരുതികൾ ഇനി വേണ്ടി ഇവിടെ പടയോട്ടം വിരലിൻ തുമ്പിൽ ഉലകം തിരിയാൻ വല വീശുന്നവരെ അംഗക്കളമാകൃതിനിയുടെ ഇരകളും അതിലൂടെ അംഗക്കളമാകൃതിനിയുടെ ഇരകളും അതിലൂടെ വേണ്ടിനി യുദ്ധം വേണ്ട വേട്ടക്കാരൻ വേണ്ടിവിടെ വേണ്ടിനി യുദ്ധം വേണ്ട വേട്ടക്കാരൻ വേണ്ടിവിടെ AIPSO 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 ഇതിന്റെ ഇവിടെ അടിക്കും കാറ്റിൽ അഹിംസയുടെ ഗന്ധം സുഗന്ധം ഇതിനാൽ നിറയട്ടിനിമേൽ അനന്ത നീലാകാശം വെടിപ്പുരക്കര കഴുകിക്കളയാൻ പുതിയൊരു ലോകം പണിയാൻ പകയും ലാഭവുമല്ല സ്നേഹപ്പുഴയിനി ഒഴുകട്ടിവിടെ സ്നേഹസ്വരമാണ് AIPSO സമഭാവനയാണ് AIPSO യുദ്ധം ജീവിതമല്ലതു മരണം വഴികാട്ടുകയാണ് AIPSO യുദ്ധം ജീവിതമല്ലതു മരണം വഴികാട്ടുകയാണ് AIPSO 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 This is a translate English to local.
Okay, very good.
One minute.
ഡോക്ടർ PK ജനാർദ്ദനൻ രചിച്ച AIPSO ഗീതം സംഗീതം വേലായുധൻ ഇടച്ചേരിയൻ പശ്ചാത്തല സംഗീതം ഉദയകുമാർ അഞ്ചൽ ആലാപനം ബിനു സരിക KS പ്രിയ ശബ്ദലേഖനം റജി ശ്രീരാം.
The All India Peace and Solidarity Organization AIPSO strongly condemns the recent outburst of communal violence witnessed across several states. The growth in the number of incidents of hate speech, attack on cultural symbols, traditions and habits of people who do not subscribe to majoritarian views are a grave threat to the idea of India and its democratic, secular character. The proud syncretic culture we inherited from our glorious past is under threat. AIPSO condemns this attack on our secular traditions and vows to resist all such attacks. The General Council of AIPSO urges all its units and members to strongly defend the rights of people to choose their life, what they eat, how they dress and whom they marry, etc. AIPSO pledges to join forces with all those patriotic forces and people who are out to resist the division of our people on communal lines and protect the secular character of our country.
For the benefit of those who... why suddenly we are going to prepone our conference? I think yesterday, if people listen to Arun's speech carefully, some indication is also there. That indication is that what we wanted from Jaipur, what till not realized, but somehow some success are there. That is true because it reflected also in constitution. The biggest achievement was, in my opinion, that we try our level best to make
Consideration of the idea of public health and state's active role in well-being of the people. Socialist Cuba continues to be the beacon of hope for the rest of the continent, despite a very difficult situation imposed on it by the US economic blockade and media war against it. Cuba not only fought the pandemic valiantly in its own territory, producing its own vaccines, but also sent urgent medical help to advanced nations in the best spirit of internationalism. In Venezuela, the Bolivarian revolution has stood its ground despite many challenges since its last 20 years, and its economy has seen a major improvement despite tightening of US sanctions and the covert war imperial neighbor of the north has waged against Venezuela for a regime change. April 13 this year marked the 20th anniversary of the attempted coup against Hugo Chavez and the round defeat of the US machinations faced in its attempt to reverse the Bolivarian process in Venezuela. All India Peace and Solidarity Organization salutes the spirit of the Latin American people and stands in solidarity with the forces of peace and democracy in the region. I move this resolution on behalf of the PA.
It is passed.
now you
Thank you. Now, dear President and other colleagues, imperialist decide in Ukraine. All India Peace and Solidarity Organization expresses deep concern at the war in Ukraine. Ukraine is a theater of war, while the main players are the US and Russia. Tensions grew around the Ukraine due to the US imperialist hegemonic attitude. The most to expand NATO and enroll Ukraine as a member of that military grouping is resented by Russia, which considers it as a threat. As a security concern ignored, Russia launched a war on Ukraine. Thousands of people died. Millions are forced to flee the country as refugees and a vast amount of property was destroyed. US and its NATO allies have moved thousands of troops to the Russian border and are warning Ukraine. A series of discussions were held between Russia and Ukraine and also earlier between Russia and US. But it appears that all of them are sticking to their positions. The war in Ukraine is a threat to world peace as US and Russia are two countries that have sophisticated weaponry, and this includes nuclear arsenal. Ukraine and Russia share common history and financial bonds. After the formation of the Soviet Union in 1922, exactly 100 years ago, the boundaries were between various provinces were fixed. As a result, some Russian-speaking regions were also added to Ukraine. With this collapse of Soviet Union in the 90s, various provinces that formed the Union split and proclaimed their independence. The boundaries of such countries are nominated as they are dangerous, designed during the Soviet period. After the collapse of the USSR, then President of the US, George W. Bush, promised Russia that NATO would not move 1 inch to east. This means that it would not expand an inch to east of East Berlin. Everybody was expecting the winding up of NATO. As a propounded objective behind its formation, the existence of USSR ceased. Moreover, the Warsaw Pact formed to cover the formation of the NATO came to an end with the collapse of the USSR and other socialist Eastern European countries. Agreements were signed and a gradual disarmament and reduction in nuclear piles. So, there was a natural feeling that military blocs like the NATO were not needed. But imperialists had other ideas. Instead of disbanding NATO, it was gradually expanded to Europe in many East European countries. NATO began to expand rapidly from the late 90s with the addition of Poland, Czechoslovakia and Hungary. It was gradually revealed that the eastward expansion of NATO would stop only at the borders of Russia, with the eventual inclusion of Georgia and Ukraine also into their military alliance. Russia voiced a strong objection to those moves. The US uses NATO and its financial power in export its socio-economic model to other countries, irrespective of the preferences of those countries and overriding their sovereign concerns. The height of this plan is to destabilize Russia and weaken its head, completely preventing it from further growth or rise the powerful country. Experts point out that Ukraine's induction into NATO would mean that US missiles could hit Moscow in 5 minutes, rendering Russia's air defense system ineffectual and obsolete. US spent millions of dollars on Ukraine to ultimately force it join to NATO. The US continued its effort to meddle its internal affairs and carry out color revolutions to topple democratically elected governments. In this background that color revolution to topple the democratically elected president, Viktor Yanukovych was executed by US. In his place, a far-right nationalist neo-Nazi groups were brought into power. An authoritarian pro-imperialist government that took pro-European and pro-NATO positions was put in its place. Attacks were carried on Russia living inside Ukraine. Democratic rights were curtailed. The attack on Russian nationals in Ukraine provided the excuse for Russia to send its troops to liberate Russian-dominated Crimea and extend its help.
Stop speaking, please.
For fighting in Donbas region. The only way to prevent the impasse is to stick to the Minsk agreement, signed between Russia, Ukraine, France and Germany. This agreement was unanimously endorsed by the UN Security Council, and this includes the US also. Some of its major provisions of this agreement include disarmament of the separated Russia-oriented design, Donbas, and withdrawal of Russian forces, volunteers, demilitarization, restoration of Ukraine's sovereignty, including control of the borders with Russia, and full autonomy for the Donbas in the context of the decentralization of power in the Ukraine as a whole. But in practice, neither Ukraine nor US is serious in implementing this agreement. This leads to the present crisis in the region. Advanced capitalist countries like US are trying too hard to retain their hegemony by not only controlling the natural resources and markets, but also the navigation routes also. It wants to exert control over the Indian Ocean, Pacific Ocean in the name of the Indo-Pacific sovereignty by forming new alliances like the Quad, US, Japan, Australia and India Quads, and of course AU, KUS, Australia, UK and US. Though these alliances, they want to militarize the entire Asia-Pacific region and also strangulate China. The development in the Ukraine reflects the attempts of the US to impose its hegemony over the entire world. It is intolerable to rise of any other country, particularly that China and Russia. Instead of taking a positive note of the Russian security concern and stop the expansion of NATO and ultimately dismantle it, it is not being announced, though as yet unofficially. The NATO would become a world security agency. Finland and Sweden are now encouraged to join NATO within few weeks. This reflects the hegemonic design of the US. It is for this reason that it is increasing its military budget every year, with over $800 billion allotted to this year. The US alone spends more than 40% of the world military budget. This would be viewed in the background of the hundreds and thousands of people unable to access healthcare facilities in these times of pandemic. No wonder that due to this privatized healthcare system, the US leads the world in the number of deaths from COVID, and it is inhuman for the world to spend millions of dollars on arms and ammunition when one person is dying of hunger every 11 minutes. AIPSO demands an immediate end to the war in Ukraine. Peace should be immediately established in the region and throughout the world by dismantling all military alliances and blocs like NATO, Quad, ALCOS, etc. All those nuclear disarmament treaties that left out should be redesigned immediately. All kinds of nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction should be destroyed permanently. International relations should be guided by the principles of equality, mutual self-respect and sovereignty. Sanctions, embargoes and blockades imposed by the imperialist forces, a reflection of the hegemonic mindset, should be withdrawn immediately. AIPSO urges all the peace-loving people to rally against the war among imperialist hegemony and their treated and a threat to peace. So
the two lines I just want to read here. The COVID death, no US regarding the spending of military. Please read it again.
The US, no wonder that due to its privatized health system, the US leads the world in the number of deaths for COVID. And it is inhuman for the world to spend millions of dollars on arms and ammunition when one person is dying of hunger for every 11 minutes.
Yes, the privatized health system before that, no, though there is more GDP.
I use my
Correct. In spite of, yeah, I just a suggestion. So before, due to its privatized healthcare system, before that only few words. In spite of spending more GDP due to its private healthcare system, because that's the 13% is the highest amount the US is spending for health compared to many other countries. It is even more than the WHO.
They are giving it to the private persons.
Yes, that's what. So
Health insurance basis, this is not the problem here.
So just add few words and we will do it.
Thank you, Binu. I hope the resolution is passed.
With this.
without sugar.
Coordinating of AIPSO with the leadership of Jadhav Reddy to make his conclude speech. अब बैठ के भी बोल सकते
Friends and comrades, it is heartening to note that the General Council meeting of Jaipur was very, very successful in a big way. Thanks to Rajasthan friends, they made good arrangements and the meeting was conducted in a very good manner. The business of the meeting was so inspiring. Arun placed a report and Pallab Sen Gupta placed 2-3 reports and there were some resolutions. Everything was covered in all the resolutions put together. My only concern is that the AIPSO, going to its history, now we are at the, I can't call it as a weakest moment, but in a critical moment. Because we have, as far as my knowledge goes, we have organized 3 national conferences and 3 general council meetings in the recent times, and all the general council, all the meetings were very successful, and one, I think, an international event was a major event, was taken up by AIPSO. That AIPSO 8th Congress was held in Hyderabad. All of you are aware. Why I am trying to recollect this is, we organized a conference in Pondicherry, we organized a conference in Kerala, we organized a conference in Chhattisgarh, we organized this event here in Rajasthan. So in all the states, local party, local ruling parties were involved, and it became much easier for the organization to organize this event. But I don't know the reasons better known to the Jaipur friends. They should, had they taken the help of the Congress party, which is a active constituent of this AIPSO. I don't know, they were not involved, Sunitaji knows better. But had they taken the help from the ruling party here, things would have been perhaps much easier for her. Anyway, without taking help also, they have organized in a good manner. I must compliment them, and it's a great thing that the reference goes to these conferences were held in Andhra when AIPSO 8th Congress was held. Our AP Chief Minister was invited to inaugurate. Similarly, in Pondicherry, Chief Minister inaugurated our conference. The Kerala Chief Minister inaugurated our conference. Chhattisgarh Chief Minister also was there.